Welcome back. We have reached the end of week one. So today is Saturday, and I'm at the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco, which is related to what I put on my to-do list. And I'm here because I'm meeting with agents and editors to try to sell my manuscripts. So an issue came up in email conversation with uh, various students, and I wanted to address a specific issue, which is the question, am I good enough? And when do I know I'm good enough to put myself out there and charge money? So this is a big question, and I have been pondering it for days now since that question was first put to me in email. And it's so big, it's hard to unpack. I'm sure it's an issue that will come up over and over and over again in these 12 weeks. So I'm going to do my best, though, to at least try to address this issue today. But understand that these are things that are like peeling an onion. So when you get to the end of the 12 weeks, you'll need to come back and redo this program again from week one, okay? And you'll have access to these resources, so no problem. But the thing about it is this: it's not a black and white issue, okay? And there's no black and white way to know when you're ready. Only you can know that. And so what I want to say about this is that when you're stretching yourself, when you're pushing the envelope of your comfort zone, you're going to feel uncomfortable. That's completely natural. And when you're doing something that's new, it feels risky, okay? That's completely natural. And the fact that you want to be competent uh, in the products and services that you sell is also completely normal, completely natural. So, I think that you have to consider what's at stake. As I was pondering this question, that's really what it came down to for me, is what's at stake. Because if you're thinking about running for president, it'd probably be a good idea to check and see if you're qualified, if you have any experience and whatnot, because there's a lot at stake. But as you see, not all people out there ask themselves if they're competent before they take on the job. So, or before they apply for the job. So, if you're just talking about charging, I don't know, could be less than $100 for your product or service. Could be more, but the thing about it is when you're first starting out, I suggest giving it away for free. That way you can test it out without having anything at stake. There's virtually nothing at stake when you give it away for free. um, give it away to your friends and family, or to strangers, if you just want to check out and see what kind of feedback you get. And then when you're ready, you just understand it's just like anything in life. When you're stretching yourself, you're pushing the boundaries of your comfort zone, it is going to feel uncomfortable. That's perfectly natural. And so again, you ask yourself what's at stake. So I'm going to give you some examples from my own life. I knew well before 2002 that I wanted to be self-employed, and I was nervous to give up a good paying paralegal job with a very prestigious law firm. But at the same time, I was miserable there, so I had to take that risk. And it was, the hardest part was, when do I have enough money? And finally, the moment just came, and I knew I had to do it, just to be authentic with myself, and with the people I was working with. And so I finally took the leap, and I went out, and it took me from that point, which was the end of May 2002, it took me, oh my goodness, 3 years. I don't know. It's hard for me to just think off the top of my head, but let's just say 3 years, because it was somewhere around there. Um, and it wasn't lifting off, and partly that was because I hadn't really truly chosen the thing that I was passionate about, which is the topic of week 2. But at least I took a risk, and so eventually I did get to the place where I was really getting my wheels on the track. Uh, I had taken the risk of really pursuing what my heart wanted to do and putting myself out there. And then I was training in law of attraction, power of manifestation, wrote a book, taught a workshop, started training in astrology and tarot and other forms of divination because I always had a psychic ability. I was highly intuitive, and I enjoyed it for my own personal benefit as well. So eventually, a time came when I decided, okay, it's time to actually charge for the service of giving an astrology reading. This was probably back in 2006, and I I got hired to give a reading to 3 women who were friends, and they all wanted me to come over to one of their houses and give the reading to all 3 of them, basically as they sat around the table, and I gave one to each one. Uh, I don't remember how long it took. That's a long time ago. That was like 14 years ago or something. So, but what I remember most about this was that I was so nervous. I was only charging $35 for each reading because that was back in 2006 and I was new at it. And I was so nervous and I was sweating. And, I didn't want anyone to know because, obviously you're trying to do this thing. You don't want to admit to people how nervous you are. And so I just did my best. And then at the end, when I was leaving, the woman who hosted it, who had invited her friends over to get reading, she seemed really happy and she gave me a hug. And I was kind of embarrassed because I didn't want to, stretch out my arms because I'd been sweating. And but anyway, it ended just fine, and she seemed perfectly happy, and they never asked for their money back. They all seemed happy, so it worked out fine. And then after that, I wasn't so nervous, so I didn't have that problem anymore. But and over time, as I got more and more good at it, I was able to raise my rates to stay competitive with other astrologers. And because the thing about it is, any work you're doing, you don't want to undersell yourself. So that's part of deciding, not just are you ready, but how much should you charge for your product or service. So anyway, now it's 14 years later and I feel 100% competent about the work that I do. So I don't have a problem with that. But there are other ways that I'm stretching myself all the time. And I notice every time, I push that envelope of the comfort zone, I feel uncomfortable. It is natural, taking risks. It's part of growing. Pushing the envelope of your comfort zone, it's part of growing, but it feels uncomfortable. That is perfectly natural. So again, I would just take you back to what's at stake, because honestly, what we're talking about, the products and services that we're selling, I don't think anyone's life is at stake. I may be wrong. Maybe you're going to tell me, in email that no, your product or service is actually a life or death matter. I don't know, but it's probably not. And so, what's at stake? The most that's at stake really is whatever you charge for your product or service. And if someone comes back and says, "I want my money back," that's it. So that's all that's at stake. And in my 14 years of doing this professionally, I have the only experience I've ever had with someone asking for money back was 2 situations that were friends. And that's one of the things I've discovered is that if you give your products to friends and family, they may feel like they can take advantage of you because, after all, you're friends, right? So be very careful anytime money is exchanged between friends and family. So if you give your product or service and they pay for it, it can get sticky. So you have to decide for yourself what your boundaries are. But the point is that actually has nothing to do with whether or not you're competent. It has nothing to do with your product or service. It has to do with that relationship. And both of those examples were that go way, way back into my history. Both of those relationships ended and not had nothing to do with that particular situation. It had to do with the fact that the relationship had boundary issues, you know. And so those people aren't a part of my life anymore because I realized that my needs weren't met in those relationships, that they were too often crossing boundaries, not respecting my boundaries. And so those relationships needed to end, and they did. As soon as you start setting boundaries, a lot of times people will leave your life because they want to be in a relationship where they can cross your boundaries. So anyway, the point is that had to do with the relationship, not the product or service that I was selling. Because I have never had anyone who's not a friend or family ask for their money back in all my years of doing this, except for one situation that I remember back in the early days when I was working for Colorado Free University. It's an adult education school. And after class, I, cleaned up and I was leaving the building, and the president director, Helen Hand, stopped me, and she says, she asked me about this one particular student. I was like, uh-oh, because the person had been really hard to deal with during this three-hour workshop. She says he asked for his money back, and so at first I got scared, like, oh my God, does that mean I did a terrible job? And she said, don't worry about it. He always asks for his money back, no matter whose class he's taking. And I was like, oh, okay. So it had nothing to do with me. So that is honest to God truth. In all the years I've been doing this, which is now going on 14 years, other than those situations, 3 situations I just talked to you about had nothing to do with me or my product or my service. They had to do with the other person and their inability to kind of respect and appreciate what someone else is offering. So it's really, I think, again, you have to understand that when it comes to asking yourself, am I good enough? Can I put my product or service out there into the world and ask for money? Or can I apply for this job? Can I ask for a raise? Because you're having self-doubt, just ask yourself, what's at stake? Because first of all, like I said, it is, when you stretch, it's natural to feel uncomfortable. You are going to feel uncomfortable. But ask yourself, what's at stake? Okay, so what if I give this product or service and someone asks for their money back? If that's the worst thing that's at stake, it's not a big deal. Because, let's say you charge $200 for a product or service and someone asks for their money back. If you're having a problem with that, then the issue has nothing to do with that particular situation. It's an abundance issue. It's a fear. It's a lack or poverty paradigm that makes you afraid. Because believe me, when you live in an abundance mentality, stuff just flows to you. It flows out, it flows in. You give what you can give, people receive it, they reciprocate, and then you receive from other people and you reciprocate, and it just flows in and out and in and out and in and out. And there's nothing to fear. So if you're afraid that that could be a result of you putting yourself out there, taking a risk, stretching, growing, and the worst thing that could possibly happen actually happens, if you're afraid of that, it's more likely an abundance issue. It's not that you need to be afraid of taking that risk or stretching yourself. Okay, just hold that in your mind, and then I'll look forward to feedback from all of you through email to let me know, like, how did this speak to you? Do you understand what I'm saying? Or is there some doubts you still have about this? So I think that's probably all I can say at this moment about this subject. But again, if you still have questions, like you're not sure, maybe I don't understand where you're coming from, Maybe you think your situation's unique and you need further information. You can let me know by email. But I think mostly what it comes down to is you're the only person who can truly decide if you're ready to stretch in that way. If you're ready to put yourself out there, if you're ready to take that risk, you're the only person who can truly make that decision. And then see what happens, you know. It's going to be different for all different kinds of situations. Here I'm at this writers conference meeting with agents and editors, and for a long time, you know, I've been writing and trying to get published for a long time. I have self-published, but getting a traditional publisher is extremely competitive. And I sometimes wonder, you know, am I good enough? But eventually, just by continuing to put myself out there, I did get some publications, and I have finaled in contests, and I did win first place in a writing contest. And so I start to conclude that, yeah, I'm probably am uh, competent in this area. It's just that it's super, super competitive. So I'm stretching myself here. I'm even wondering if, you know, if this is a good idea for me to be doing this, but it's part of life, you know. Babies get up and they learn how to walk and they fall down. And, you know, at some point as kids, we probably learn how to ride a bike and we learn how to swim. Every time we do these things, it feels really challenging. You know, we learned how to write our names, and it feels challenging. But as we get older and we, you know, get more and more, in a sense, kind of brainwashed by this domination culture, then more and more we start to doubt our own sense of power and what we have to offer the world. And so there is nothing objective that can tell you one way or another whether you're ready to put yourself out there. All I can say is that when you do it, when you stretch yourself, yes, it feels risky, it feels uncomfortable because you're pushing the boundaries of your comfort zone. You're going to feel uncomfortable. That's perfectly natural. So just ask yourself, what's at stake? Can I handle a worst case scenario? And if the answer is yes, then you may as well go for it, you know? Just see what happens. I don't think the worst will happen anyway, so you'll probably be fine. And if it does, then it's like you can take that in as feedback and work with that and see what that is all about. Because like I said, the situations where it happened to me had nothing to do with whether or not I was competent. It had to do with the relationship and that person, what they expected, you know. Were their expectations of me realistic, or were they based in a lack of respect for boundaries, which I'm very clear on what it was about. And I'm not doubting my competency. But again, if the worst thing happens that I can possibly imagine, the worst thing that's at stake, if that happens, which is somebody asks for their money back, again, it's not an issue. It's not necessarily an issue of competency. If I'm afraid of that, maybe it's an issue of a poverty mentality. You know, that I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what could happen. That's a poverty mentality, you know. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't care about whether or not you're competent. I give the example of running for president. I think someone who's running for president should probably know if they're competent for the job, if they have experience. But for everything else, there's what's at stake is slim enough that it's not a live or die issue, and you can handle the consequences. So again, let me know in email, did this speak to your questions, or do you have more questions? Because we'll continue to explore them as we go through this 12-week program. All right, so I'm going to end that now, and I will see you again in week 2. Bye-bye.